Story The Ballpoint Murders by Edwana Longbottom. Chapter 1. Shadows of Coldwater City. In the dimly lit streets of Coldwater City, a strange aura settled, casting a somber hue over everyday life. Nestled between towering skyscrapers, beneath the endless bustle, was a fear that gripped the hearts of its inhabitants. A fear born from the whispered lore of the Ballpoint Pen Murderer. Inspector Ray Harmon stood at the edge of a freshly cordoned-off crime scene, his silhouette almost a part of the oppressive night. The orange glow of streetlights fought a losing battle against the creeping shadows, highlighting the outlines of police officers bustling around the latest victim. Harmon watched them work with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Every crime scene was a cathedral of sorts, holy in its quiet revelations and confounding mysteries. But unlike any place of worship, these sights brought no solace, just more questions, more darkness. The cold wind nipped at his cheeks, whispering past memories that lingered like old ghosts. Harmon had once been invigorated by his career, but the unsolved murder of his daughter, Lily, had dulled that edge. Her death was an unresolved note, a discordant melody that played ceaselessly in his mind. He approached Dr. Eliza Morgan, the forensic expert assigned to the case. She looked up from the large sheet of paper in her hand, a detailed depiction of the artwork discovered on the victim. "Ray," she greeted, her voice a blend of professionalism and underlying concern. "I've never seen anything like this before." Harmon scrutinized the image, a complex tangle of lines and shading, etched into the victim's skin with a ballpoint pen, the instrument that gave the killer his ghastly moniker. The precision was haunting, each stroke deliberate, infused with an unsettling beauty. "Any idea of the symbolism?" he asked, masking his unease with detached curiosity. Morgan shook her head. "It's unlike any artistic style I'm familiar with. The symbolism seems almost personal, like a language only the killer understands." Harmon's mind raced, trying to dissect the mind of a murderer who used creativity to convey something dark and unfathomable. He had wheels turning in his head, each theory colder than the last, but nothing settled into a picture with the clarity he so desperately sought. "We've got to get into this person's head," Harmon said finally, though the conversation felt as circular as the sketches they studied. With each case, understanding the criminal's mind was a dance of revelation and obfuscation. As he turned away from Morgan, he caught sight of something barely noticeable at first. The sumptuous stroke of a ballpoint pen, marking the initials RH into the flesh. Harmon felt an story unsteady thrill accompanied by a chill that crept down his spine. The letters were his own initials, a signature that tainted the scene with an uncomfortable intimacy. Chapter 2. The Canvas of Guilt. Coldwater City had seen its share of calamity, but the ballpoint pen murders stretched to new extremes. Inspector Harmon sat in his dimly lit study, the room cluttered with stacks of old case files and newspapers that cried murder in bold letters. The contrast between the articulated chaos strewn around him and the neat elegance of the killer's work etched on bodies was stark, a messy, brutal reality mocking the dark artistry. Harmon spun an empty glass in his hand, the amber liquid clinking rhythmically, a muted metronome for his thoughts. Framed pictures loomed from shelves in shadows, memories of his daughter Lily flitting in and out of his periphery like melancholy specters. A knock at the door pulled him from his self-imposed isolation. Detective Sarah Bell, his partner and tether to the present, stepped in, her presence a breath of fresh resolve amid his turmoil. "We got something," she said, holding up a file folder. The look in her eyes told him it was significant, a spark amid the darkness. "It's about time," Harmon replied, trying to infuse his voice with confidence. Each second slipped by with the fluidity of wasted opportunity, and he refused to let any more time be a tribute to failure. Sarah's determination had always been a source of stability for him, a reminder of the duty beyond his demons. She laid the folder open on the scattered desk. A name came up, Arthur Sloan. He's a graffiti artist known for his ballpoint pen illustrations. Had some run-ins with the law, skirted the line between criticism and tribute of city politics. "An artist turned killer?" Harmon murmured, rubbing his chin. "Might explain the complexity and personal nature of the symbols." "Or someone good with a pen," Sarah suggested. "There's more. His brother vanished years ago, last seen in an asylum. Forgotten asylum records, Harmon echoed, a touch of intrigue clinching his thoughts like an unyielding vice. That might just be the missing link. Every clue, every revelation was a piece of a puzzle that danced an infuriating waltz just out of reach. Harmon leaned in, the photograph of Arthur Sloane glaring up at him from the file. An unassuming man, in the sunlight of the photo, with a shadowy life now entangled with their investigation. "I want to meet him," Harmon said, the decision cutting through his fatigue like a blade through fog. Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes lingering momentarily on Harmon as if she could erase his burden with sheer willpower. "There's a gallery down in the artistic district. Some of his work is displayed there. It's a starting point." As Sarah left the room, the echoes of her footsteps fading into silence, Harmon found himself alone again, the ghost settling back around him in a familiar comfort. He drained the last of his drink, the burn matching the fire igniting within him. Chapter 3. A Dance of Dark Art. Harmon walked the streets of the artistic district, its atmosphere alive with vibrant displays and the lingering scent of lacquer and paint. The stark contrast from the cold monotony of the police station was welcome, yet also foreboding. Here was a place where creativity held sway, but it was laced with a dark undercurrent, like a vibrant storm brewing on the horizon. The gallery loomed ahead, an imposing structure seemingly drawn from the very streets it inhabited. Inside, the echo of footsteps on tiled floored floors carried a haunting rhythm, wrapping visitors in a cocoon of creativity and mystery. Arthur Sloane's section was tucked away towards the back, the sparse arrangement of his pieces adorned with plaques that whispered tales of solitude and chaos. Harmon stepped forward, drawn to a large canvas sketched entirely in the familiar ink of a ballpoint pen. The strokes were both precise and wild, a cacophony of imagery that spoke volumes. Faces seemed to emerge from the chaos, their expressions trapped between agony and liberation. It was unsettling yet captivating, evoking a spectrum of emotions not easily categorized. As Harmon absorbed the piece, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "It's beautiful in its tragedy, isn't it?" Harmon turned to find a tall, lanky man standing beside him, his eyes focused on the artwork with a reverence that bordered on fanaticism. "Arthur Sloane?" Harmon inquired, assessing the man whose life had become tangled with the gruesome tableau that haunted his days. "Detective," Arthur acknowledged, a touch of whimsy in his smile. "I've heard about you. Your investigation is the talk of the town." "That tends to happen when bodies start showing up with ink drawings carved into their skin," Harmon replied, his tone steeled but respectful. This man held answers, whether he was the artist behind the murders or merely connected to the twisted mind that was. "I swear to you, my art stays on the canvas," Arthur said, reading the unasked question in Harmon's eyes. "But I can see why you'd think otherwise." A silence fell between them, broken only by distant murmurs of other gallery-goers and the steady shuffle of feet against the gallery tiles. "Your brother," Harmon pressed. "There's mention of an asylum. Could he have—" Arthur bristled, a fleeting flash of anguish passing over his features before calming like stirred waters. Edward was lost long before he went there. His mind was different, but he loved art that never left him. Story. "Is it possible he's involved in all of this?" Harmon asked, carefully watching for any telltale signs of evasion. Arthur hesitated, biting down on his lip, his gaze drifting back to the swirling figures in the painting. "I don't know. Edward was a genius in his own right, but even geniuses can fall into shadows." Harmon observed the sincerity in Arthur's words. There was something genuine in his mix of pride and grief, a reflection of a past mired in brilliance and madness, much like Harmon's own crossroads. "Help me find him," Harmon urged, a plea woven into his demand. Arthur nodded, the resolve settling in his eyes like ink on paper. "If Edward is out there lost in the art, I'll help you bring him back." Chapter 4. Threads of Madness. Armed with a fragile alliance and new threads to pull, Harmon and Sarah embarked on a deeper investigation into the forgotten records of the asylum. It was an institution swallowed by time, its name a whispered relic in the aged districts of Coldwater City. Records were scant, yet within the hushed corridors of dusty archives, they unearthed a forgotten journal, a chronicle of a mind unraveling into madness. The journal belonged to Edward Sloane, filled with scrawled writing and sketches that ranged from brilliant to deeply disturbed. Harmon and Sarah sat in a dim room within the station, poring over Edward's journal like archaeologists unearthing a long-lost civilization. Each page revealed fragments of a man consumed by whispers in his head, a man who saw realities beyond the visible spectrum. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, tracing a sketch with her finger. It depicted swirling vortexes and figures that seemed to blend into one another, a chaotic dance of shades and shadows. "It's almost like what we're seeing at the crime scenes," Harmon remarked. "But why the ballpoint pen? Why engrave it onto his victims?" "Perhaps the pen is his instrument of control," Sarah theorized. "Where words failed him, he uses drawings to connect or reach people." Harmon nodded, considering the connection. "It's a form of communication, something he might believe is necessary to convey the messages or emotions he struggles to articulate." They continued rifling through the journal, and Harmon's fingers halted on a page densely covered in text, the writing looping and spiraling over itself. Each line is a thread to them, binding, whispering. Only in artistry can the truth be revealed. We are shadows in ink, ensnared by our own desires. "What do you think he means by that?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying a mix of fascination and dread. "Story. It sounds almost philosophical," Harmon said, his words slow as his mind grappled with the ominous prose. "His art isn't just art, it's his reality. Maybe he sees himself as an arbiter of truths the rest of us are blind to." Sarah shook her head, thoughtful lines etching her brow. "But what truths? What shapes these shadows? We might need Arthur's insight on this," Harmon concluded, flipping the journal closed. "No one else will know Edward's mind like his brother." Chapter 5. An Intersection of Darkness. The night deepened as Harmon retraced his steps to Arthur's studio, each visit peeling back another layer of truth. He found Arthur amidst a cyclone of papers and half-finished works, the walls a chaotic tribute to obsession and genius. Arthur looked up from his work, eyes aglow with an intensity that matched the fervor of the sketches surrounding him. "You've discovered something?" he asked, a statement wrapped in a question. Harmon held out the journal. "I need you to look at this. It's Edward's. There are pieces here that might be clues." Arthur accepted the journal with the care one might give an ancient artifact, each page turned bringing a flicker of emotion, a shadow spot of memory or revelation. "These are beautiful," Arthur whispered, his fingers tracing the intricate designs. "Edward had a way of seeing the world, and it's like he's speaking to us through this." "It's more than art," Harmon pressed. "There's a purpose behind each stroke, each image. We need to understand the why behind this, why he would." Arthur placed a finger on a page, halting Harmon's words. "Here," he pointed at a drawing, an overlapping pattern of figures, familiar but subtly changed from previous sketches. "That's it. That's the one from the most recent murder," Harmon recognized, the connection bringing both excitement and dread. Arthur regarded it with haunted eyes. "I remember him drawing this, trying to make someone see what he saw, but he kept saying that no one could." "What was he trying to convey?" Harmon asked, every revelation bringing them closer to a chilling understanding of Edward's visions. Arthur hesitated, his voice barely more than a whisper. "A truth beyond our world. He thought these figures were like a prophecy, messages we're meant to understand." Harmon swallowed hard, the weight of that realization a tangible presence. Each step, each discovery, painted a larger picture, one where Edward flowed between madness and artistry, seeking solace or validation in an unforgiving reality. Story. They stood together, bound by their determination to apprehend a reality obscured by shadows and ink, one that threatened to swallow Coldwater City whole. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Abyss. Harmon and Sarah worked tirelessly to stitch together any remaining threads, finding connections between the victims that hadn't been clear before. Each victim shared a history with art. Painters, critics, gallery owners, all influential in a sphere Edward had long been separated from. "It's as if he's choosing people who are part of the world he was barred from," Sarah noted, her finger running down a list of names linked to art affiliations in the city. "Significant players in the art world," Harmon muttered. "He sees them as gatekeepers, maybe? Or he believes that they hold the key town locking or acknowledging the truths he's trying to communicate," Sarah suggested. each one a note in a symphony only he hears. Their discovery gave dimension to Edward's motives, but also added layers of urgency. Time was a relentless river, and Edward was already one step ahead, moving unseen through the underworld of art and shadows. As night descended upon Coldwater City, Harmon found himself wandering the streets with a new destination, the place where it all began, the abandoned asylum. Its looming silhouette stood against the backdrop of the darkened sky, a shrine of forgotten souls and lost promises. The asylum was a monument to despair, its crumbling facade telling tales of neglect and decay. Harmon and Sarah cautiously ventured inside, their flashlights slicing through the murky darkness, illuminating decrepit walls and corridors echoing with the ghosts of yesteryear. In the depths of the building, they found a room, once an artist's sanctuary, now abandoned, decorated with Edward's distinctive sketches. The walls were his canvas, and each drawing was imbued with an unsettling vitality, reminiscent of the scenes left on his victims. "We're close," Harmon murmured, an electric anticipation tingling in the air. Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the room, piecing together the puzzle suspended in ink and paper. "There's a method to his madness, a pattern. It's all connected." Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from the corridor, accompanied by the scratching sound of a pen, a dark ritual in progress. Harmon and Sarah exchanged a glance, an unspoken agreement binding them together as they followed the source. The atmosphere thickened with tension, the very walls seeming to lean in, whispering secrets of the past. As they rounded the corner, Harmon saw him, Edward Sloane, hunched over a makeshift easel, scribbling with frenetic vigor. The pen in his hand glided with fluid motions, trails of ink running into visions beyond conventional perception. "Edward!" Harmon called out, his voice piercing the silence like a beacon. "Story." Edward paused, turning slowly, his eyes meeting Harmon's with a comprehension teetering between lucid and lost. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a madness wrapped in the shell of genius. Sensing the confrontation, Sarah positioned herself with care, ready for any sudden movement. Yet Edward seemed transfixed, caught between the veils of worlds only he could perceive. "I knew you'd come," Edward murmured, his voice a haunting melody punctuating the stillness. "Do you see it now? The truths hidden in the ink?" "We see you," Harmon replied, his voice steady, compassion threading his words. "We want to understand, to help you communicate what you can't with words alone." Edward looked at his ongoing work, then back at Harmon, shadows dancing in his eyes. "This world is blind, but maybe you can see," he said, as if offering a fractured olive branch. Harmon took a step forward, careful not to disrupt the delicate balance. "But no more deaths, Edward. Let us help you convey your message without violence." Edward hesitated, the turmoil within him a palpable force. The pen dropped from his fingers, a tiny clatter echoing louder than a symphony in the quiet room. His surrender was not just to the law, but perhaps to his own ghostly internal torment. Chapter 7. A Portrait of Redemption. The arrest unfolded with surprising ease. Edward led away gently by the officers who carefully avoided smudging the ink of his last masterpiece. His descent from shadowed artist to captive was bittersweet, tinged with an unspoken understanding between him and Inspector Harmon. As the asylum door closed behind Edward, Harmon felt the ache of 1,000 ghosts lifting, the enigmas unraveling into threads of clarity. The Ballpoint Pen Murders would haunt the annals of Coldwater City, but the artist behind them had been granted a chance at a different kind of understanding, a hopeful palate in the absence of victims. Returning to Arthur with news of his brother's arrest, Harmon was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Arthur understood that while the darkness had receded, Edward's brilliance had been preserved, and his story had reached its climax not with a tragic end, but an opportunity for redemption. As Harmon walked away from the studio one last time, he inhaled the night air deeply, a refreshing taste of promise laced with the bittersweet tang of a path well tread. The city, meanwhile, began to feel lighter, as if a curtain of foreboding had been lifted from its shoulders. Coldwater City would heal. Its streets would bustle once more. Art would again flutter through its veins, untainted, free from the pen's shadowed ink. And for Harmon, the specter of his daughter's unsolved murder settled into memory, a melody of closure amidst echoes of what once was. The Ballpoint Pen Murders had brought him face to face not only with the brilliance and madness of others, but also with his own inner demons. In the process of unraveling Edward's mysteries, Harmon had found a measure of peace within himself. Story Epilogue, Ink and Light. Months later, a new exhibit opened in Coldwater City's renowned art museum, curated by none other than Arthur Sloane. The theme was Art from Darkness, featuring pieces drawn from the edges of sanity, woven with the lives and stories of artists who danced on the line between creative genius and the abyss. In a corner of the gallery, a small but powerful section was dedicated to the works of Edward Sloane. His art, once feared and misunderstood, was now contextualized and appreciated for the raw emotion and unique perspective it brought to the world. Each piece invited viewers to look deeper, to see beyond the surface and into the profound complexities Edward had spent his life trying to convey. Harmon stood before one of Edward's sketches, hands deep in his pockets. It was a self-portrait, sketched in ballpoint, revealing a young man with eyes reflecting both clarity and chaos. He felt a strange alignment with Edward, a shared journey of battling shadows to find illumination. Beside him, Sarah appeared, offering a quiet, supportive presence. "Quite the journey, isn't it?" she remarked, her voice warm and contemplative. "It is," Harmon agreed, his gaze steady on the portrait. "Seeing the world through his art makes it feel less lonely." Sarah nodded, understanding how the darkness they'd faced had been illuminated not by solving the case alone, but by finding empathy and connection within it. "Art can do that, I've realized. It reaches where words sometimes can't." Harmon smiled, a soft, genuine shift transforming his features, acknowledging both the weight and the beauty of their experiences. As they moved onward through the exhibit, the echoes of the past danced gently behind them, each step forward a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the legacy left by the Ballpoint Pen Murders, Harmon had found more than just a sense of closure to the haunting chaos. He had discovered new beginnings, an inked path leading toward healing and hope. With a lighter heart and a clearer mind, Inspector Ray Harmon resumed his journey through life, a journey redefined by understanding, compassion, and the universal language of creativity, eternally inscribed not only in Coldwater City, but within himself.